The most dangerous thing about the new year is not starting wrong. It is starting the same, spiritually. New years arrive quietly, but they carry a strange weight, an invisible pressure to feel hopeful, motivated, ready. And if you are honest, maybe you do not feel any of that. Maybe you feel tired. Maybe the calendar changed, but your mind did not. Maybe your heart is still carrying things from the last season that never found rest. Unanswered prayers, disappointments you never processed, battles you survived but never healed from. And yet everyone expects you to move forward as if nothing is there. This is where most people misunderstand what moments like this are really about. They think a new year is an invitation to do more, plan more, ask more, demand more from God. But Jesus never taught that spiritual transitions begin with addition. He taught that they begin with positioning. Timing matters spiritually. There are moments when the soul is more open, more sensitive, more exposed. The beginning of a year is one of those moments, not because of superstition, but because reflection naturally increases. Resistance lowers. The heart becomes quieter, even if the world becomes louder. And this is exactly why so many years repeat themselves. Same prayers, different calendar. Same patterns, new goals. Same exhaustion, wrapped in motivation. People rush to build new habits without addressing old weight. They ask God for new doors while standing emotionally attached to closed ones. They want clarity without first releasing confusion. Jesus did not teach people how to chase better outcomes. He taught them how to become aligned vessels. He was not a motivational speaker. He was a teacher of transitions. He knew that if the inner posture does not change, no external shift will last. If you feel an unusual restlessness right now, this is not weakness. It is awareness. Something inside you knows that stepping into another year without spiritual recalibration will only deepen the fatigue. You do not need louder declarations. You do not need more promises to yourself that you will try harder. You need alignment. And alignment does not begin with effort. It begins with honesty before God. Jesus often stepped into new seasons by first withdrawing, not announcing, by releasing, not accumulating, by listening, not rushing. He understood something most people miss. The soul cannot move forward while carrying unresolved residue, emotional residue, spiritual residue, expectations that were never surrendered, pain that was normalized, fear that learned how to pray but never learned how to trust. This video is not about starting the year strong. It is about starting the year right. There are specific spiritual actions Jesus modeled and taught for moments like this. Actions that cleanse before they empower. Actions that quiet the heart before they activate faith. Actions that determine whether a year becomes a repetition or a turning point. Most people skip them because they feel uncomfortable, because they require stillness, because they ask for surrender before blessing. And that is why the cycle continues. As you listen, do not rush ahead mentally. Do not turn this into information. Let it become reflection. Let it become prayer. Let it become a moment where God is not asked to fix your year, but invited to realign your heart. What comes next will not add pressure. It will remove weight. And once that weight lifts, clarity follows naturally. The hidden spiritual mistake people make after the new year begins is subtle, but it is costly. Most people think the problem is lack of discipline, lack of faith, or lack of consistency. But Jesus pointed to something much deeper. The real issue is not what people fail to start. It is what they refuse to finish. They carry emotional and spiritual residue from one season into the next and expect prayer alone to overwrite it. It does not work that way. There is a reason you can pray sincerely and still feel blocked. A reason you can ask God for clarity and still feel fog. A reason you can declare faith and still feel heavy inside. It is because unresolved weight does not disappear with time. It settles. And whatever settles in the heart begins to influence how you hear God, how you interpret life, and how you step into new seasons. Jesus never rushed people into the future without first dealing with what they were carrying. When he healed, he often addressed the inner posture before the outer condition. When he called disciples, he asked them to leave nets, tables, identities, attachments, not because those things were evil, but because they belonged to a previous chapter. What you do not release voluntarily will follow you silently, and when it follows you, it shapes your prayers without your awareness. This is where many people unknowingly sabotage the beginning of a new year. They add new goals without removing old grief. They create routines without resolving resentment. They ask God for direction while still emotionally negotiating with the past. And then they wonder why peace feels temporary, why motivation fades quickly, why the same patterns return wearing new clothes. Jesus taught a different order: clean, then align, then move. Not move, hope, and pray it works. Cleaning is not about perfection, it is about honesty, about allowing God to touch what you learned to carry quietly, the disappointment you minimized, the prayer you stopped believing in, the moment you said you were fine, but something inside you shut down instead. Unresolved residue blocks clarity because it keeps the soul divided. Part of you wants the future. Another part is still protecting itself from the past, and divided hearts struggle to trust fully. This is why Jesus spoke so often about the heart before behavior. He knew that whatever occupies the heart determines what the year becomes. If you feel resistance right now, pause. Resistance is often a sign that something true is being exposed. The beginning of a year reveals what you avoided closing, and avoidance feels safe until it becomes heavy. Jesus never forced people forward. He invited them inward first, into truth, into surrender, into release. Before any spiritual action can empower you, this mistake must be corrected. You cannot build peace on top of unresolved weight. You cannot expect clarity while carrying emotional noise. And you cannot step into a new season while refusing to let the old one end properly. What comes next is not about forgetting. It is about closing with God, so you do not keep reliving what was meant to stay behind. The first spiritual action Jesus taught for moments of transition is the act of intentional closure before God. This is not about pretending the past did not hurt. It is not about forcing forgiveness before the heart is ready. It is about positioning the soul so it stops living partially turned backward. Closure is not emotional relief. Closure is spiritual alignment. Many people think they have moved on because life kept moving, time passed, responsibilities demanded attention, but the soul does not heal by distraction, it heals by surrender, and whatever is not surrendered remains active beneath the surface. Jesus understood this deeply. That is why he never invited people into the future without first asking them to release something from the past. Leave the nets, leave the table, let the dead bury the dead. These were not harsh commands. They were invitations to freedom. When you do not close a season properly, you carry it into prayer without realizing it. You pray through disappointment. You pray through fear. You pray through mistrust. And then you wonder why prayer feels heavy instead of life-giving. It is not because God is distant. It is because your heart is still holding things it was never meant to carry forward. Spiritual closure begins with honesty before God. Not polished words, not strong faith language. Just truth. God, this is where I was hurt. This is where I felt abandoned. This is where I stopped expecting good things. This is where I survived, but something inside me closed. Jesus never healed people who hid their condition. He healed those who brought it into the light. Closure happens when what was buried is finally placed in God's hands instead of being managed internally. This is why so many people ask God for new blessings but feel no capacity to receive them. the heart is full, full of unresolved conversations, full of expectations that were never surrendered, full of versions of life that did not happen. Closure is not forgetting those things. It is releasing ownership of them. Saying to God, I no longer need to understand everything to trust you with this chapter. Jesus modeled this constantly. Before major movements, he withdrew. He prayed. He released outcomes. He aligned his will with the Father's. Even Jesus did not step forward carrying emotional residue. How much more do we need that pause? If you skip this step, the year may start busy, but it will feel familiar. Familiar exhaustion, familiar anxiety, familiar cycles. Closure creates space. Space for clarity. Space for peace. Space for God to speak without competing noise. This is not about going backward. It is about finally letting something end so it stops following you. As this settles in you, notice what your heart brings to the surface, not to judge it, not to rush past it, but to acknowledge it before God, because what you are willing to release now determines how light your spirit will feel as you move forward. And what comes next builds directly on this, because once a season is closed, desire itself must be realigned. Once a season is closed, something deeper is exposed. Desire, not surface desire, but the quiet motivation behind your prayers. This is where many sincere believers get confused. They pray often, they believe in God, they want a better year, and yet nothing seems to shift internally. Jesus addressed this directly. He taught that prayer is not powerless, but misaligned desire weakens its impact. Most people approach a new year asking God to fix outcomes, fix my finances, fix my relationships, fix my anxiety, fix my future. But Jesus consistently redirected people away from outcomes and toward alignment. Seek first the kingdom, not because God withholds blessings, but because misaligned desire turns prayer into negotiation instead of surrender. Desire shapes expectation. Expectation shapes interpretation, and interpretation shapes experience. If your desire is rooted in fear, your prayers will sound urgent but feel anxious. If your desire is rooted in comparison, your prayers will feel restless. If your desire is rooted in control, your prayers will feel heavy. Jesus did not condemn people for these desires. He invited them to be reordered. This is why wanting a better year is not enough. Many people want peace, but still desire control. They want clarity, but still desire certainty. They want God's guidance, but still want to decide the destination. Jesus exposed this tension gently but clearly. You cannot serve two masters. You cannot pray for freedom while clinging to fear. Desire must be realigned before prayer can become restful. Realignment happens when you allow God to question your motives without defending them. Why do I want this year to change? What am I truly afraid of repeating? What outcome am I secretly trying to protect myself from? Jesus asked questions not to accuse, but to reveal. What do you want me to do for you? Not what do you think you should want. What do you actually want? This moment is uncomfortable because it removes spiritual performance. It strips prayer of religious language and brings it back to truth. God, I want peace, but I am afraid to let go. God, I want direction, but I fear losing control. God, I want healing, but I am attached to what the pain gave me. These prayers do not weaken faith, they purify it. Jesus taught that aligned desire produces light burdens. When desire shifts from outcome to obedience, prayer changes tone. It becomes quieter. Trust deepens. Anxiety loosens its grip. You stop asking God to fix the year and start asking Him to shape the heart that will walk through it. And when desire aligns, prayer stops feeling forced and starts feeling natural. If you skip this step, prayer becomes effort. You pray often but feel tired afterward. You speak faith but carry tension. Alignment restores simplicity. It allows the soul to want what God is already offering instead of fighting for what it thinks it needs. This is where peace begins to stabilize. Sit with this honestly, not to analyze, to notice what has been driving your prayers: fear of repeating the past, pressure to prove progress, comparison with others, or a genuine desire to walk with God regardless of outcome. What you discover here prepares you for the next action, because once desire is aligned, the soul must learn how to enter the year differently, not louder, quieter. Once desire is realigned, there is a natural temptation to move quickly, to speak louder, to declare more, to announce intentions. But Jesus did something radically different at the beginning of movements that mattered. He became quieter. He withdrew. He reduced noise. He chose solitude over display. And this is one of the most misunderstood spiritual actions for entering a new season. Silence is not passivity. Silence is positioning. Noise keeps the soul reactive. Silence allows it to become led. When everything is loud, urgency feels spiritual. When everything is quiet, discernment becomes possible. Jesus often stepped away from crowds right when momentum was building, not because he lacked purpose, but because he protected alignment. He understood that clarity is fragile in noisy environments. At the start of a year, the world gets louder. Opinions multiply, expectations rise. Everyone is announcing plans, goals, transformations. And without noticing, many people absorb pressure they were never meant to carry. Silence is the act of refusing to internalize what God did not assign. It is choosing presence over performance, listening over reacting. Jesus did not begin his ministry with declarations. He began it with 40 days of withdrawal. He did not announce his next move to everyone. He prayed, he listened, he fasted, he waited. Silence was not an absence of action, it was the action. In silence, motives are purified. In silence, fears surface. In silence, God's voice becomes clearer than your own thoughts. Many people are tired because they confuse movement with obedience. They act quickly but feel empty. They speak boldly but feel disconnected. Silence restores inner authority. It recalibrates the nervous system. It creates space where God can guide instead of compete. This is why Jesus said his sheep know his voice, not because it is loud, but because it is familiar to those who stay close. Entering a year quietly does not mean hiding. It means anchoring. It means choosing to let God set the pace instead of the calendar. Silence removes the pressure to prove progress. It dismantles comparison. It allows obedience to emerge organically rather than being forced. If this feels uncomfortable, that discomfort is important. Silence exposes dependency. It reveals how often noise is used to avoid feeling uncertain. Jesus did not fear uncertainty. He trusted the Father to lead step by step, and that trust was cultivated in stillness. This is where many people rush past what could have been transformative. They skip silence and wonder why direction feels blurry. They skip stillness and wonder why peace feels temporary. Silence is where integration happens, where closure settles, where aligned desire stabilizes, where the soul stops striving and starts listening. As you enter this year, you do not need to announce anything. You do not need to convince anyone. You do not need to move fast to feel safe. Let God speak before you respond. Let silence become the place where courage grows quietly, because what comes next will determine whether these actions change anything at all. And that turning point is often overlooked. There is a moment when everything becomes clear, not because something new appears, but because something familiar keeps repeating. This is the turning point most people avoid. When the three spiritual actions are ignored, life does not fall apart dramatically. It quietly loops. Same struggles, different dates, same prayers, new words, same exhaustion, disguised as determination. And this is not because God is absent. It is because the soul keeps entering new seasons with the same inner posture. Jesus warned about this pattern without using fear. He spoke of houses built on sand, not destroyed immediately, but slowly exposed when pressure arrived. Ignoring closure keeps wounds active. Ignoring alignment keeps prayer conflicted. Ignoring silence keeps the heart reactive. Together, they create a year that feels busy but hollow, progress without peace, motion without direction. Many people mistake repetition for testing. They say God is stretching them again. But often, repetition is instruction. It is life pointing back to what was never addressed. Jesus never forced change through suffering. He revealed truth through patterns. When something keeps returning, it is not punishment. It is invitation. This is why some people feel tired at the beginning of a year instead of hopeful. The soul recognizes familiar terrain. It remembers the emotional cost of cycles that never ended properly. Motivation rises briefly, then fades. Discipline starts strong, then collapses under unresolved weight. And slowly, people conclude that change is not for them, that peace is temporary, that clarity belongs to others. Jesus never accepted that narrative. He consistently showed that transformation begins inward, not outward. When these actions are ignored, prayer becomes effort, faith becomes performance, spiritual life becomes maintenance instead of relationship. People keep asking God to change circumstances while He is waiting to heal posture. This turning point matters because awareness precedes choice. You cannot correct what you do not recognize. And recognizing this pattern is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you. The repetition is not your identity. It is simply the signal that something essential was skipped. If this resonates deeply, pause, not to judge yourself, to acknowledge truth, what has been repeating, what prayers feel familiar, what exhaustion keeps returning under different labels. This awareness is already movement. It is the moment when the year can stop being a continuation and start becoming a correction. What comes next is not instruction. It is invitation. A pause where the soul stops reacting and starts listening, where God is not asked to fix anything, but is allowed to highlight what truly matters. This pause is gentle but powerful, and it is where real change begins. Before anything is done, said, or decided, there is a moment that changes everything. A pause, not an empty pause, but a sacred one. This is the space most people skip because it feels unproductive. But spiritually, it is where integration happens, where what you heard stops being information and becomes awareness. Jesus often created this pause. He allowed silence after truth, not because nothing was happening, but because something deep was settling. This is not the moment to analyze your life or plan corrections. It is the moment to notice what is being highlighted within you, what lines stayed with you, what stirred discomfort, what brought unexpected relief. God often speaks not through new thoughts, but through resonance, through the quiet sense of recognition that says, "This is for you." Jesus did not rush people into decisions. He let truth sit. He let questions form. He allowed space for reflection. Because transformation does not happen through pressure. It happens through consent. When the heart recognizes truth and chooses to respond, not because it is forced, but because it is ready. Use this pause to stop scrolling internally, to stop rehearsing what you will do next, to simply sit with God as you are. No fixing, no performing, no correcting, just presence. Ask one honest question. God, what are you showing me right now? And then listen, not with expectation, but with openness. This is where resistance softens, where insight deepens, where clarity becomes gentle instead of urgent. The soul does not need constant stimulation to grow. It needs space to breathe. This pause recalibrates your inner pace. It reminds you that you are not behind, you are being led. Many people miss this because they want action steps immediately. But Jesus knew that hurried obedience often leads back to old patterns. This pause protects what was revealed. It allows conviction without condemnation. It invites peace before movement. As this settles, trust that God is working even if nothing feels dramatic. Stillness is not absence, it is preparation. The next step will come, but it will come with peace instead of pressure, direction instead of anxiety. What remains now is response, not rushed, not loud, just sincere. And that response is where everything converges into a simple invitation. Now the response becomes simple, not dramatic. Jesus never pressured people into public declarations. He invited private commitment first. A decision made in the heart carries more power than words spoken out loud. This is where the journey turns personal, not what someone else should do, not what sounds spiritual, but what God is quietly asking of you. You already know which of these actions touched you most, the one that brought resistance, or relief, or conviction. That is not coincidence. That is direction. God rarely overwhelms us with everything at once. He highlights one door, one adjustment, one movement of the heart. And He waits for willingness, not perfection. If this moment brought clarity, acknowledge it. If it brought peace, protect it. If it brought discomfort, do not run from it. Discomfort is often the doorway to freedom when it is guided by truth. Jesus never demanded instant change. He honored honest steps. Follow me was always an invitation, never a threat. Let this be the year you stop asking God to rush and start allowing Him to lead. Where prayer becomes relationship again, where silence feels safe, where alignment replaces pressure, and where faith feels lighter, not heavier. If you feel led, leave a comment sharing which action you sense God calling you to take, not for others, but as a quiet act of commitment. If this video brought peace or clarity, let that be known with a simple like. And if you want a place that continues to offer grounding, reflection, and truth-centered guidance, consider subscribing, not to consume more content, but to walk this journey together, one aligned step at a time. There is nothing more to add, only something to protect. What you felt while listening matters. Do not let it dissolve into routine. Jesus often warned about hearing without guarding. Truth that is not protected fades under noise, urgency, and distraction. What God reveals in stillness must be carried intentionally into daily life. This is where many people lose momentum, not because they disagreed, but because they moved on too quickly. The seed was planted, but not covered. Guard this moment. Return to it in prayer. Revisit the questions that surfaced. Let God continue the conversation beyond this video. You do not need to fix your entire year today. You only need to respond to what God highlighted. Obedience is rarely loud. It is usually quiet, consistent, and unseen. And that is where it becomes powerful. If this message met you where you are, stay connected. Not for information, but for alignment. For reminders that faith is not about striving, but about walking closely with God through every season.